In the year 193, the soldiers of the Praetorian Guard did something almost beyond belief. Having murdered their own emperor, they stood on the walls of Rome and auctioned off the entire empire to the highest bidder. A senator named Didius Julianus won it, promising each soldier a fortune, and for that he was handed the Roman world. This is the origin of the auctioneer, the man who once sold an empire under the hammer. So how did a ritual grand enough to sell the Roman Empire itself become the polished business that now sells a single painting for the price of a skyscraper? The auctioneer is one of the oldest professions on earth, and also one of the most quietly misunderstood. We picture him as a servant of the sale, a man who simply calls out prices until the highest one wins. He is far more than that. The auctioneer does not find the price of a thing, he manufactures it by turning buyers against one another in a room engineered for exactly that purpose. To see how, and to understand how the same trade runs from a Roman spear stuck in the ground to a hushed gallery at Sotheby's, you have to follow the hammer across 2,000 years. Start with the word, because it hides the entire strategy. Auction comes from the Latin auctio, which means, quite simply, an increasing. At its root sits the verb augio, to increase, the same root that gives us the word augment. An auction is not named after buying, or selling, or bidding. It is named after the one thing the auctioneer needs above all else, the price going up. The Romans held these sales out in the open, and they marked them by planting a spear in the ground, a sign that goods were being sold under the authority of the state. They called it selling sub hasta, under the spear, and the man who ran the sale was not even the owner of the goods. He was the praeco, the crier, a professional voice hired to work the crowd. And the Romans auctioned almost everything. They sold the spoils of war, the captives and plunder dragged back from the frontier beneath that planted spear. They auctioned the estates of the dead and the bankrupt, picking a fortune apart piece by piece. They sold human beings from raised platforms so buyers could inspect them. Auction was woven so deeply into Roman life that, in the year 193, it reached its most astonishing extreme. When the Praetorian Guard murdered the Emperor Pertinax, they put the throne itself up for sale, and Didius Julianus outbid a rival by promising every soldier a small fortune. He bought the Roman world at auction. The story is well recorded, though the ancient writers surely sharpened its shock, and it ends the way these stories so often do. Within about 2 months, Julianus was overthrown and executed. He had paid the highest price in history for something he could not keep. Auctions may be older still. The Greek historian Herodotus described a custom in Babylon, where once a year, the young women of a village were said to be auctioned as brides, the money from the sales used to provide dowries for the rest. Whether this truly happened as he told it, or whether it is a traveler's tall tale, historians still argue, so treat it as legend rather than settled fact. But it shows how ancient the basic idea is, that the fairest way to decide who gets a scarce thing is to let people bid against each other out in the open, and let the price climb until only one is left. Now move forward to the England of the 1600s, where the auction took on one of its strangest forms. Buyers gathered around a single lit candle, often with a pin pushed into the wax, an inch below the flame. Bidding carried on as long as the candle burned, and the very instant the flame reached the pin and the light guttered out, the final bid stood. The diarist, Samuel Pepys, watched these sales and noted a clever trick the regulars used, staying silent and shouting their bid only in the last breath before the pin dropped, gambling on the exact moment the flame would die. It was, in its way, the first form of sniping a last-second bid, 300 years before anyone would do the same thing online. Then, in the 1700s, the auction put on a suit and became respectable. In 1744, a London bookseller named Samuel Baker held a sale of valuable books, and the firm he founded would in time become Sotheby's. In 1766, a charming and theatrical man named James Christie opened his own rooms, founding Christie's. These houses took the raw, ancient machinery of the auction, the crier, the rising price, the hungry crowd, and wrapped it in velvet. They were no longer selling war booty beneath a spear. They were selling paintings, libraries, and the estates of the aristocracy, and they made the whole business feel less like a liquidation and more like an honor bestowed on the buyer. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the auction found a completely different voice, and this is where the tobacco fields of our title come in. In the American South, from colonial Virginia onward, the tobacco crop was sold in enormous warehouses, pile after pile of cured golden leaf laid across the floor. To move through hundreds of lots at speed, the American auctioneer developed something found nowhere else: the chant, that rolling, rhythmic, sing-song cascade of numbers that sounds almost like music. It was not mere showing off. The chant let a skilled auctioneer take bids, hold the crowd half hypnotized, and sell a whole pile of tobacco in seconds. It became so iconic that a tobacco auctioneer named L.A. Riggs, known to everyone as Speed, ended radio adverts for cigarettes with the cry the whole country came to know, "Sold American." The auctioneer had become a performer, and his instrument was the human nervous system. And not every auction even runs upward. In the Netherlands, the flower trade perfected the opposite idea, the Dutch auction, where the price starts high and falls, ticking steadily downward on a great clock, until the first buyer shouts to stop it and takes the lot. There is no slow climb here, only nerve. Wait a moment longer and you save money, wait one instant too long and a rival buys it out from under you. At the flower market in Aalsmeer, millions of stems are still sold this way every morning. Whole fortunes of tulips and roses changing hands in the time it takes the clock to fall a few numbers. Up or down, the trick underneath is identical. The auctioneer builds a clock and a crowd, and then lets your own fear set the price. And here is the hinge of the whole story, the thing that separates a mere crier from the profession as it truly works. Somewhere along this journey, the auctioneer stopped being a man who discovers what something is worth and became a man who manufactures what it is worth. Think about what an auction really is. It does not measure demand. It creates it by putting rivals in the same room, in real time, watching one another, and letting the fear of losing do all the work. A quiet negotiation between one buyer and one seller has no drama and no fever. An auction adds an audience, a ticking clock, and a rival. And suddenly, a calm and sensible person will pay far more than they ever planned, not because the object changed, but because losing it in public had become unbearable. The auctioneer's true product was never the goods. It was that feeling, and the modern auction house learned to sell it by the hammer. Everything the auctioneer does is engineered to fan that feeling. The rising-only price gives you a sense of momentum and scarcity. The rapid chant strips away the time you would normally use to stop and think. The reserve, a secret minimum below which the item will not sell, quietly protects the seller while you bid in the dark. And auctioneers have long leaned on a trickier tool, the practice of taking bids off the wall, or chandelier bidding, calling out phantom bids against the empty air to push the real bidders higher before anyone genuine has even committed. Economists even have a name for what the winner so often feels the next morning: the winner's curse. The cold suspicion that the very fact you won means you paid more than any other person alive was willing to. Auction fever is not a flaw in the system. Auction fever is the system. And do not underestimate the theater of it, because the theater is entirely functional. The raised rostrum that lifts the auctioneer above the room, the paddle you must physically raise, committing your own body to the bid in front of everyone. The chant of going once, going twice, that starts a countdown ticking in your chest. And the gavel, that little wooden hammer whose single sharp crack means the decision is final, irreversible, done. None of it is decoration. Every piece of the ritual exists to compress your thinking, quicken your pulse, and make you act now, in this room, before the moment and the object are gone for good. So, what does this profession look like today? And where does the money actually sit? Here are the numbers. The global art auction market alone runs into the tens of billions of dollars a year, and the great houses now handle cars, wine, watches, jewelry, and whole estates besides. And far from the glamour, the very same trade sells cattle in country, sale barns, repossessed cars, government surplus, and the contents of abandoned storage lockers because the auctioneer turns up wherever scarcity and money meet. In 2017, a painting attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, the Salvator Mundi, sold at Christie's for about $450 million, the highest price ever paid for a work of art at auction. But here is the detail that reveals the real business, and it has almost nothing to do with the painting. When you buy at a major house, you do not simply pay the hammer price. You pay a buyer's premium on top, often around a quarter of the sale price again, while the seller pays a commission out of the other side. Read that again. On a single lot, the house is paid by the winner and by the seller at once. The auctioneer does not need to own the painting, love the painting, or even care who takes it home. Whoever wins, the hammer falls, and the house is paid from both directions. And the auction did not stay locked inside the grand houses either. In 1995, a programmer named Pierre Omidyar built a simple website that let strangers bid against one another for odds and ends, and eBay turned the entire planet into a single endless sale room. Suddenly, the ancient machinery, the rising price, the closing clock, the fear of losing, sat in everyone's pocket, selling everything from baseball cards to used cars to the shed at the bottom of the garden. The tools got faster and the crowd grew to the size of the world, but not one part of the underlying trick was new. Omidyar had simply taken a spear planted in Roman ground and turned it into code. So go back one last time to the year 193, to Didius Julianus standing before the Praetorian Guard, buying an empire with a promise. He won the bidding, and the winning destroyed him, because in the fever of the moment he had paid for something whose price had nothing to do with its worth. That is the auctioneer's oldest and greatest trick, played out on the largest stage there has ever been. The object was never the point. The competition is the product. That's not an accident. That's the business model. From a spear planted in Roman ground, to a dying candle in a London coffeehouse, to a chant ringing over a warehouse of tobacco, to a raised paddle in a silent gallery, the auctioneer has only ever sold one thing, and it was never the goods. It was the fear of watching someone else walk away with them. So the next time you feel your own hand starting to rise, at a charity gala, on a bidding app, in a crowded saleroom, stop and ask yourself a single question. Do I actually want this thing, or do I just want to win? Because the auctioneer already knows which answer he is counting on. Decide your price before you walk in, and let the hammer fall on somebody else if it has to. The calmest person in the room is the only one the auction cannot beat. If this video changed how you look at the gavel and the raised paddle, subscribe, because next we're covering more everyday jobs whose real history nobody tells you.